It's not an effort to show the public that anybody did anything wrong.
He has been trying to send for so many years that, yes, there are people that question the way.
Body towards this way, hands in the air, being compliant. He gets shot in his face and chest. And
community activists started a GoFundMe page for the family just to raise money to get that mural.
Number 6, Philando Castile. Philando Castile was a beloved member of his community, a dedicated employee of a local school district, and a loving father and partner. He was also a victim of police violence, slain during a routine traffic stop in Falcon Heights, Minnesota on July 6, 2016. The encounter began when Castile was pulled over by police officer Geronimo Yanez for a broken taillight. Castile, who was a licensed gun owner, informed Yanez that he had a gun in the car and was reaching for his identification as requested when Yanez suddenly shot him multiple times, slaying him in front of his girlfriend and her young daughter.
Your brake lights are out, so you only have one active brake light, and that's going to be your passenger side one. Your third.
Sir, I have to tell you, I do have a firearm on me.
Don't reach for it then. Don't pull it out.
He was trying to get out his ID and his wallet out his pocket, and he let the officer, and the officer just shot him in his arm. We're waiting for a back. I will, sir.
The incident was captured on video and shared widely on social media, causing widespread anger. Castile's demise was yet another example of systemic racism in law enforcement, pointing to the fact that Castile was a black man and Yanez was a white police officer. Yanez was charged with second-degree slaying and 2 counts of dangerous discharge of a firearm, but was ultimately acquitted in 2017.
He lets the officer know, "Officer, I have a firearm on me." I begin to yell, "Don't move!" But how can you not move when you're asking for license and registration? It's either you want we are the people. We are the people. And we can't keep allowing.
Number 5, Tamir Rice. Tamir Rice was a 12-year-old boy from Cleveland, Ohio, who was tragically slain by police on November 22, 2014. The incident began when a resident in a nearby building called 911 to report someone in the park with a gun, but the caller also mentioned that the gun was probably fake and that the person was likely a juvenile.
And just so everybody knows, the video is compressed for time, so it has.
The black male turned, lifted up his shirt, grabbed, reached in his waistband, pulled up the weapon, and on it, because when he got about this far, that's when I shot. Why?
2 police officers, Timothy Lohman and Frank Garmbach, responded to the call and approached the park in their patrol car. Within seconds of arriving on the scene, Lohman exited the vehicle and shot Tamir, who was holding a toy gun. The entire encounter lasted only a few seconds. Tamir was rushed to a nearby hospital, but he perished the following day from his injuries. The shooting sparked widespread outrage and protests across the country, with many calling for accountability and reform in law enforcement. The investigation into Tamir's demise was complicated by conflicting reports about what had happened and by the fact that the police officers involved were not indicted by a grand jury. In 2015, the city of Cleveland reached a $6 million settlement with Tamir's family. Number 4, Amadou Diallo. Plainclothes officers in the New York Police Department's Street Crime Unit fire 41 shots at unarmed Amadou Diallo, an immigrant from Guinea, slaying him on the steps of his apartment building shortly after midnight on February 4, 1999. Diallo's slaying sparked a public outcry and eventually resulted in the shuttering of the SCU, but the 4 officers who shot him were found not guilty of his slaying. Officers Sean Carroll, Edward McMillan, Kenneth Boss, and Richard Murphy were all members of the SCU, a special plainclothes unit of the NYPD that had earned plaudits from others in law enforcement. As Diallo stood on the stoop of his building in the Bronx, the 4 officers mistakenly identified Diallo as a suspect. They claimed to have him confused for a serial exploiter, but at other times suggested they had identified him as a mugger or drug dealer. Whatever their reasoning, the officers, who were dressed as civilians, shouted at Diallo to show his hands. Diallo apparently reached into his pocket instead, pulling out his wallet as he attempted to run for the safety of his building.
Far beyond one shooting, beyond a single verdict of guilt or innocence. On the streets here, there are signs.
I just thought that he pulled and drew a weapon on my partner. had fired.
Then we're not gonna break, we're not gonna bow down. We promised Amadou we were gonna get just on these tens of thousands on the jury November if the election comes.
Carroll shouted to his fellow officers that Diallo had a gun. The officers later stated that they warned Diallo before opening fire on him, slaying him within minutes. The slaying incensed much of the public to the extent that the officers' trial for reckless endangerment and second-degree slaying was moved to Albany. On February 25, 2000, the jury found the 4 officers not guilty of all charges. Diallo's father, Saikou Diallo, called the verdict the second slaying of his son. The slaying did lead to an investigation of the SCU and its subsequent disbandment. Diallo's family filed a civil wrongful demise suit against the city and eventually received $3 million. All 4 officers remained with the NYPD. Boss, who had previously shot another black suspect fatally in 1997, was promoted to sergeant in 2015. Number 3. Sean Bell. The shooting of Sean Bell rocked New York City and sparked outrage across the country. On November 25, 2006, Sean Bell was celebrating his upcoming wedding with his friends at a nightclub in Queens. As they left the club, they got into an altercation with a group of undercover police officers who were investigating possible drug activity in the area. The details of what happened next are contested, but what is known is that the police officers fired 50 shots at Bell and his friends, slaying Bell and injuring 2 others. Bell was just 23 years old and was set to be married later that day. The shooting sparked immediate outrage and protests across the city, with many calling for an investigation into the police officers involved and demanding justice for Bell and his friends.
Put it up, and it's a spot where people, if they don't remember how him
and his family, and giving everybody someplace to come and be able to remember him at.
The investigation was led by the Queens District Attorney's Office, which eventually charged 3 of the police officers involved in the shooting with slaying, attack, and reckless endangerment. In April 2008, a judge acquitted all 3 police officers, sparking further outrage and protests.
People know is just the whole tragedy of how his life ended, but not too many know.
A long marriage, so it's like, this is what he wanted to do, this is what he was taught by his father. Neighborhood is gonna be Sean Bell for life. They will always go.
Number 2, Michael Brown. On August 9, 2014, police officer Darren Wilson fatally shot Michael Brown, an unarmed black teenager in Ferguson, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis. Protests and riots ensue in Ferguson and soon spread across the country. There are many different accounts of the incident, including the testimonies of Wilson and of Brown's friend, Dorian Johnson, who was with Brown at the time. Many details differ, but most accounts agree that Wilson saw Brown and Johnson walking in the street, demanded they get on the sidewalk, then stopped his police SUV in front of them in order to confront them. He and Brown had an altercation through the open window of the car, during which Wilson fired twice. Brown and Johnson tried to leave, but Wilson exited his car to pursue them, and at some point, Brown turned back around to face Wilson, who then fired 12 shots, 6 of which hit Brown. Wilson claimed he fired in self-defense as Brown charged him, which Johnson denied. A witness claimed that Wilson warned Brown he would open fire, and that Brown responded with, "Don't shoot," before he was slain, although that was not corroborated by ballistic and DNA evidence and other witness statements.
Those last seconds, did he charge or did he put his hands up? Should have been enough to send this to trial.
Struggle over the officer's weapon. There was at least 1 shot fired within the car. I appreciate that it took a very long time yesterday to process this.
Hundreds still gathering, with calls for an even bigger rally tomorrow at the police station.
The community immediately reacted with rage at the news of 18-year-old Brown's demise. The shooting ignited long-simmering tensions between the majority black population of Ferguson and the local police, who were mostly white. Though public opinion was sharply divided, the protests and riots and the response by Ferguson's heavily militarized police demonstrated the extent to which the relationship between racial minorities in America and the police had frayed. Brown's name, the phrase "hands up, don't shoot," and the very mention of Ferguson quickly entered the lexicon of the growing Black Lives Matter movement. In November 2014, a grand jury declined to indict Officer Wilson, and later, the Justice Department concluded that Wilson acted out of self-defense and was justified in slaying Brown. Number 1. Eric Garner. On July 17, 2014, 2 New York Police Department officers confront Eric Garner, a 43-year-old African-American father of 6, for illegally selling cigarettes. Garner perished after losing consciousness as a police officer locked him in an illegal chokehold. Within hours, a video of the incident sparked outrage across the country.
I told you the last time, please leave me alone. Take me left for what? Sitting here the whole time, running our business. What are you talking about? I watched you. You watched me do what? Who did I sell cigarettes to? Well, I did. My bag! I don't got no bag! I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
Garner was known as a neighborhood peacemaker in his Staten Island community and was also well known to the police for selling cigarettes illegally near the ferry terminal on Staten Island. Officers Daniel Pantaleo and Justin D'Amico, called to the scene because of a fight that Garner reportedly broke up, exchanged words with Garner about his cigarettes before Pantaleo reached around Garner's neck and put him in a chokehold, despite such a maneuver being against NYPD rules. Pinned to the ground by the officers, Garner repeatedly told them, "I can't breathe." Eventually, he lost consciousness. He was pronounced deceased at a hospital roughly an hour later, and the medical examiner ruled his demise a slaying by suffocation. Footage of the incident quickly went viral. There were protests in the days following Garner's demise, but it was a grand jury's decision not to indict Pantaleo on December 3 that sparked large demonstrations in New York City and elsewhere across the country. Garner's last words, "I can't breathe," became a rallying cry for the Black Lives Matter movement. The police officer whose chokehold led to Garner's demise in 2014 was fired from the police department in 2019 and stripped of his pension benefits. The following year, when New York State repealed its ban on publicizing police disciplinary records, it was revealed that Pantaleo had been investigated for misconduct 7 times in the 5 years before Garner's demise. That's all for today, folks. See you next time.